Okay, welcome to the second Python HackerRank challenge, Python if else. In this one, we're given an integer n, and depending on the value of that integer, we'll either print weird or not weird. So for example, if n is odd, we'll print weird. If n is even and in the inclusive range of 2 to 5, we'll print not weird. So this is pretty straightforward from a problem-solving perspective. The one thing with these kind of problems that you want to look out for is whether there's any cases or any values for n that fulfill multiple of these conditions. In that case, you'll want to think about how to handle this. However, in this particular problem, n really only ever fits into one of these categories, so we can handle these cases pretty much independently. Okay, before we jump into coding, I'll just say a few words about the code that's already written here. These import statements just import modules that may be required for the code to run. And then this line here, you can basically ignore. It just makes sure that this code down here is only called if this document is called directly. This line here takes an input that is provided by the website and assigns it to the value n. So this n is corresponds to this guy, and that's the number that we're going to work with. We don't know what it is, we just know that it's a positive integer between 1 and 100. Okay, let's jump into the coding. So there's two things I'll use here, and one is the if statement, and the other is the modulo operator. And I'll try and give a brief introduction to both, but ultimately, if you want to know more about them, I'll make separate videos, and as soon as they're ready, I'll link them in the description below. Okay, the first thing we want to do is if n is odd, we want to print weird. So we'll use the if statement in Python, if, and now we need to formalize a condition that is true whenever n is odd. So we'll use n modulo 2 does not equal to 0, and if that is true, we will print weird. Now this works because what the modulo operator does is it basically takes n, divides it by 2, and then returns whatever the remainder is. If you divide an even number by 2, the remainder is 0. If the number is odd, the remainder will be 1, and therefore not equal to 0. This statement will be true, and this will be executed. Okay, now we're ready for the second condition, which is that n is even and in the inclusive range of 2 to 5. So we'll use elif this time, and that's a way of chaining these if statements together so that it will first check the first one. If it's true, it will execute it, and then skip the rest. But if the first one is not executed, it will go to the second one and check whether that is true. So in this case, we want n to be even. So that would mean that n modulo 2 is equal to 0. And because we want both statements to be true, that 2 is smaller or equal to n, and n is smaller or equal to 5. In that case, we want to print not weird. Okay, the next two conditions are very similar. We want n to be even and then in the range of 6 to 20 or larger than 20. So what we can do is we can just copy paste our code here and modify it. So this stays the same because we want it to be even, and now the range is from 6 to 20. And then in the last condition, it will just be larger than 20. And in this case, we want to print weird, and then in this case, not weird. Okay, so let's give that a try. Yeah, and that looks good. So we'll submit our code, and we're done. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. See you at the next challenge.